Support for I Am Salt Lake comes from KRCL 90.9, amplifying community voices since 1979. This listener-supported music discovery station covers everything from reggae and punk rock to local grassroots activism. Listen today at 90.9 FM or online at krcl.org.
This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Mark Miller Subaru, Market Source Real Estate, and the Salt Lake Barber Company. We're going to be telling you more about them throughout this episode.
Hey, I want to personally welcome you out today to episode 393 of I Am Salt Lake podcast. My name's Chris Hollifield.
And my name's Chrissy Hollifield. And if this is your first time listening to this show, you might be wondering what it's all about. Well, this podcast is all about showcasing the awesome people here in Salt Lake City, Utah. We get to talk to musicians, authors, business owners, restaurant owners, breweries, distilleries, really anyone who might have a cool story to share.
And if you weren't aware yet, I wanted to tell you guys, this is the first episode of August, so I wanted to tell everybody that this is the 7-year anniversary of this podcast. So I want to thank those of you that have been telling your friends about the podcast, those of you that have been listening, those of you that have left reviews, those of you that have donated, those of you that are Patreon supporters, sponsors, just anyone who's been involved in one way or another with this podcast. I want to thank you because the last 7 years would not have been possible without you.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what do you think? When you started this 7 years ago, Chris, did you imagine the show being what it is today?
Absolutely not. I knew it had the potential of being a big podcast here in Salt Lake City, a podcast that people would use as a resource, but I never imagined it would turn into what it is today. And I got goosebumps right now, Chrissy.
Yeah.
It is really, really a cool experience. The last 7 years have been amazing. I've grown a lot as an individual, and I'm sure people that have been listening since the beginning, you've heard that in me.
Oh, yeah.
And I wanted to, again, publicly thank you again for spending another year being a co-host on I Am
We'll see
Salt
how
Lake.
long I last. No, it's been a blast. I have loved every second of it.
And we're recording today right in beautiful downtown Salt Lake City in our podcast studio that's located way in the back of Empire Merchandise. Empire Merchandise is located at 680 South State Street. You might be asking yourself, well, what the heck is Empire Merchandise? Empire, they carry an amazing selection of vape juice, vape accessories. They got CBD products, t-shirts, all kinds of fun stuff here, as well as I Am Salt Lake podcast t-shirts. They sell them here for you. So stop on in, check this place out, and support them because, hey, they let us record our podcast here.
Exactly.
Today on the podcast, we get to sit down and chat with friend of the podcast, Cody Egbert. We thought it could be a really interesting episode for you if we were to bring on a recovering drug addict from Salt Lake City and have him share their story. Chrissy and I met Cody about a year ago, and after finding out about all the stuff that he's overcome, we had to bring him on the show. We had to get him to share his story because I know there's probably other people out there that are dealing with the same struggles as Cody did. So on this episode, Cody shares a story on what it was like for him as a drug addict and a drug dealer here in Salt Lake City. Keep in mind, though, that this conversation is a little more intense than some of our previous episodes, but we feel it's an important subject matter to discuss. We're going to be getting into that in just a moment, though. Before we do that, though, let's give some love to one of our awesome sponsors, Market Source Real Estate. For the past 17 years, Market Source Real Estate has been helping people buy and sell homes in Sugar House as well as the greater Salt Lake City area.
Market Source Real Estate has been a sponsor of this podcast for the past year and a half, so we were really excited when we decided to purchase a home that we were finally able to work with Monique and Jeremy and experience it for ourselves.
They made the process so easy.
They really did, and they literally helped us find our dream home. It's incredible. I love our house.
So whether you're looking to buy a home or even sell a home, they know all the ins and outs of what to look for or tips that will make your home sell faster. You can find all of their info at thinksaltlakecity.com or just give them a call, 801-810-6773. Again, their website, thinksaltlakecity.com, or just give them a call, 801-810-6773. And many thanks to Market Source Real Estate for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Let's get into that conversation with Cody Egbert when he came over to our podcast studio to share his story. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy. Let's even just find out where's home for you, Cody. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in North Salt Lake City, Utah. Pretty much the Rose Park area was kind of where I was born and raised. I was in between like living with my parents down in Rose Park to bouncing back to my grandmother's house in North Salt Lake. And primarily my residence was in Rose Park, and then we kind of adjusted that so I could go to school up in North Salt Lake at Orchard Elementary. So it was kind of like a bounce back situation.
So did you come from a big family by yourself, only child?
So I thought I was an only child up until like the age of like 10 when I found out that my dad actually had another son. So I had a half brother.
Okay.
And I didn't meet my half brother until I was about 12 years old.
What was that like for you when you found that out?
It was like a shock, man, because here I'm thinking like, oh man, I wish I had like an older brother or sister or whatever. And then boom, I had one, and the crazy thing is we're only 7 months apart. But after like being able to see my brother, we got close really quick. We were hanging out with each other. And then he also had a half brother and a half sister. It was kind of like a situation where my dad had a relationship with his friend's wife. And then she got pregnant with his kid, but him and his best friend parted ways, and obviously for the circumstance and the reasons, but they continued their family, which that's how my brother has half brothers and sisters. So
are you guys still close?
Yeah. He was living in Florida for quite some time. But now he came back to Utah and he's kind of just trying to start his own family and stuff. So
dude, let's go back, man. How old were you when you the first time you ever got introduced to drugs?
Unfortunately, the situation was I was 10 years old. And it wasn't like a normal kid experimenting with drugs type of deal. What had happened was my dad and I'm going to say my aunt, which is actually my stepmother because my father actually married my mom's sister.
Wait, back up a little bit there. So your dad married your mom's sister?
Yes. My parents split up.
Okay.
And my dad married my mother's sister. And, it was kind of different for me. But anyways, they had went to Wendover, right? And we lived in a house at my dad's friend's house. And my dad's friend's nephew was watching me and his cousins. And as everybody went to sleep, I was always the type that wanted to know more. Like, I was always like, okay, well, this dude has tattoos. I look up to him. He swears, he smokes cigarettes. Like, that's the type of people that I always grew up looking up to. So I always wanted to hang out with him. I was trying to be somebody like that, right? Well, I think he used that to his advantage and he asked me if I wanted to, hang out, and everybody was asleep. It was late at night. And I remember I go into the kitchen and he's drinking or whatever. And he asked me, he goes, do you want to do what adults do? And I was like, well, yeah, like, of course, duh, a 10-year-old that's curious like that. Of course. Well, he calls me into the laundry room and he's sweating profusely. I remember that. And he he sets me on the dryer and he reaches up behind like the sun bleach box soap. I can remember it like in detail because of the situation. And he pulls 2 syringes out from behind the box of soap. And he does what he needs to do. He shoots up and I'm sitting there like
right in front of you.
Right in front of me. And like at this point I was like, it was like fight or flight. Like, what should I do? What should I do? Mm-hmm. He just told me to calm down. And he was talking really fast and everything. And I was like, okay, I trust this guy. I've been around him enough, so I trust him. And then he says, well, let me see your arm. And I said, okay. So I gave him my arm and he's like, it's only going to hurt for a second. And I was like, all right, and he kept telling me like, your dad does this. It's okay. Your dad does this. It's okay. And I was like, all right, whatever. And like he stuck the needle in and he pulled back and he shot me up. And all I could remember like at the feeling of that point was like my heart was just racing.
Well, you're 10 years old.
And it's probably an adult dose.
Yeah.
And a
10-year-old dose.
Well, you know what I mean.
There
shouldn't ever be a 10-year-old dose.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So my entire body got really warm. I was just like, holy crap. And my heart started beating. I started sweating profusely, and he starts to take off his shirt. And I was just like, okay, things are getting real weird. I already feel weird. Like, things are getting real weird. Takes off his shirt, and I go to like leave, and he told me to stay there, and he pulled me back. And I was, at this point, I was like under his full control.
Oh, yeah.
Just being under the influence like that. And so he starts to take off my pajamas, and I'm just like, in my head, like if I was conscious, if I could have been conscious, I'd have been like, what are we going to do? Laundry? You know what I mean? But at that point, I didn't know what was going on. So when he took off my clothes, he took off his, and he asked me to fondle him, And of course, like, I was scared at this point, and I remember like trying to pull away, and he had hit me upside the head.
Was this one of your first experiences with another naked body? Even?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't.
I mean, I had walked in on my parents, like, they're in the shower, going to the restroom, and I just shut the door and like, oops, I didn't need to see that,
Right.
But this was one of my first experiences with anything type of sexual or anything. So I pull away, and he hits me, and immediately, like, when you hit a kid, you think you're doing something wrong, And so that's where my mind went, is like, oh crap, I don't want to beat the crap out of me. Cause I had known this guy for being like violent towards others, and always coming home, being in fights and stuff. So I was in fear, So that started happening. Well, then he started fondling me. And at this point, I'm just like, what in the hell is going on?
You're super high though, too.
Yeah,
so you're probably enjoying it.
And I'm just like, I don't know whether to enjoy it, because my body's telling me like, you're having a heart attack, dude,
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was numb. You like totally numb to like anything that was going on. Like, my mind was just gone. And with methamphetamines, it's an upper, so you're like, you're full of energy, but then put it into this like sexual situation, and methamphetamine enhances like sexual senses.
So this was meth. I don't know if you mentioned that.
Oh, yeah.
It was meth.
It was methamphetamine.
Wow.
And I didn't obviously know what it was until later, after growing up and kind of figuring it out.
Connecting the dots.
But so that was my first experience. And then I remember trying to like, okay, dude, like he was like kissing me and stuff like that, and it didn't feel right to me, I was like, what the heck? Like, this is not what I expected, And then I remember him bending me over and raping me. And that right there was an experience where I think that God or whomever is out there took my mind away from that moment, because they didn't want me to suffer through that pain. But I did. That's where things started to get a little bit blurry as far as that happening. But I remember afterwards. So let's go a little bit forward to afterwards, right? Mm-hmm. I'm in my room and I'm bleeding, I'm still high, and I'm not quite grasping exactly what had just occurred. Like, I'm in a nightmare, wake me up, type of thing. And he comes into my room, and he's like screaming at me, like in my face. And he's like, if you tell anybody, I'll kill you. I'll kill your family. Well, at that point, like, I really didn't give a shit about myself. I was more worried about my family at that point. So I was like, dude, I'm not going to tell anybody. And he says, do you want to see how easy it is for me to kill? And he reaches in my hamster's cage and grabs my hamster Rigby and squeezes it and kills it right there, and then drops it in there. Well, I was in fear. I was like, holy crap. After that, my parents had came home, and he actually said that I squeezed the rat.
Wait, did your parents come home the same night?
They came home like later, early in the morning. It was probably like maybe 6 or 7 in the morning when they arrived. This had happened probably just three hours before.
So you were still high probably when your parents got home. I was still high
when my parents came home, and all I could do was cry. And they were thinking that I was crying because I had killed my pet.
Yeah. Like, they thought
and I wasn't, and I think he knew what he was doing when he did that, because he's like, this guy's emotional. I know they're on their way home. I got to do something anyway. So my parents had asked me if I killed the rat. I just said yes. I mean, the hamster, I just said yes at that point, because I didn't want this guy to freak out and kill anyone. Well, the rest of that summer, because I used to enjoy going to my dad's house. I had like a little dirt bike that I'd ride around in his yard. It was just just the people around me was different than when I was at my mom's, where I just had to stay home and play with the guys across the street. You know, I had more things to do. But I didn't go back to my dad's for quite some time after that. And my father ended up getting raided a month after all that had happened.
For drugs.
For drugs.
Oh, wow.
For drugs. My dad was involved in some heavy drug trafficking stuff, and as well as the guy who I'll call him B because we'll just leave him anonymous.
So just a quick question. So this happened when you're 10 years old. Yes. How old are you now? Just to give a little bit of context of time. How long ago that was?
I am 30 years old.
So this was 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
All here in Utah. This was all happening right here in Utah. So, I mean, it's safe to say Utah has always had a drug problem.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
what are your thoughts? And we'll get back to this story, but I just for listeners, I want people to understand that it's not just doves and roses in Salt Lake City and in Utah. I mean, we have a drug problem. You've been dealing with it for 20 years.
Yes.
And we're very good at suppressing it and not talking about it.
Yeah. There's been a lot of, so I started dealing drugs at a really young age.
How old were you?
I started dealing drugs probably when I was 13 or 14.
How did you even fall into that? I mean, how would a 13 or 14-year-old say, this is what I'm going to do now?
So I sought attention and validation from older people after this had occurred. I kind of was in the mentality of kind of fight fire with fire. So the guy who had done my abuse, he was in like the drug game and the drug world, and he was affiliated with another gang and stuff like that. Well, I decided that I wanted to feel whole again because something was taken from me as a child. So I want what that dude had, but I want more of it, and I want more power. But the thing is that with abuse is that usually people who's been abused, they abuse people. Me, I ultimately wanted to kill that man for what he had did to me. So I was angry. So I was fueled by anger.
And rightfully so.
And so I got involved with somebody who was a few years older than me. He was like 7 years older than me, and he happened to know my abuser. But I looked up to him because he was in like the music industry. And I never told anybody what happened to me until I was 21 years old, right? So I kept it a secret.
Was that hard?
When I had actually told the guy that I'm telling you about, his name's Chad. But when I had told him, I had broke down, and I had just said, look, this is what happened to me. And he went into big brother mode. He's just like, you need to tell your parents, I'm going to kill this guy.
And that was when you were 20, 21?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was in shock ultimately because he had hung with this guy for many, many years. And it just so happens the guy got out of prison, and I was at my friend's house, and he came over, and I'm going to call him my brother. He's like my brother, Chad. He had him come over, and the first thought I had in my head was the kids. There's kids around. This dude should not be anywhere near them. And the thing is I always played like this big, tough guy who had like this armor on, right? But when I seen his face again, I went right back to when I was a child. I had immediately teared up. And my friend's like, whoa, bro, what's wrong? You know? And I told him I couldn't keep it a secret anymore. And it was probably one of the hardest things to tell my parents too, because immediately, I mean, a parent is going to feel at fault for that.
Right. A parent's going to be like, I should have known that.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
But me just trying to fight fire with fire and hanging with older people and building connections with older people, I was able to get my hands on a lot of different things. And my brother Chad, he wasn't even like, he's like, dude, you shouldn't be doing all this at your age. Like, you should be doing something else. So I had just gotten contacts with different people because I knew my brother wasn't going to like throw me down. You know what I mean? But I wanted more. And the way that I got more is I lied, I cheated, and I stealed. And that's ultimately how I got introduced to selling weed, basically with one of my cousins. And it just kind of progressed from there. I started smoking a little bit of weed, and then I was like getting that high feeling, but it wasn't the high that I had already had with meth. And I was like, this is weak sauce, you know, but I learned that drugs can mask anything. As long as you are able to stay numb, you can numb anything with it. I myself was like, okay, so weed to me wasn't a drug growing up, you know? Like, that's what I said. Like, weed is weak sauce, you know? If I wanted to numb out and forget everything.
You had to really find something else.
Yes, yeah. So then I started dabbling with cocaine. And dabbling with cocaine, it obviously numbs you physically, but mentally it does as well. But it's just so quick and it's just so profitable if you're able to sell that stuff. So I started to sell it to my friends. And I started to gain money.
Where were you selling? Like here in Salt Lake? Were you going to clubs?
I was going to school.
Okay.
I was going to school.
How old were you selling coke, man?
I was 15, 16 years old at the time when I started selling cocaine. And I had been in trouble with the law here and there. I think my very first charge was vandalism charge as a juvenile. And it was just me being a reckless kid, you know? But then my second charge ended up being like a burglary because I broke into a place to try to hang out with all my friends. Mm-hmm. And somebody told on me and said it was me. And ultimately I got punished for it. So, and believe it or not, even in the juvenile justice system, it's just as like the adult system, drugs are readily available.
In the jail system.
And especially like in the juvenile system, at least back then, parents were bringing it in for the kids because that's the only person that you can have contact with is your parents. So they would go on visits, you know, and you could hide it in your underwear or wherever you wanted to hide it because they do search you after a visit, but they don't search everything. Sure. You know, and
how long, so how long were you in juvie for?
If we put all that time together, so
on and off, just
on and
time.
off. Yeah. On and off. So let's say I went to juvie probably about 15 years old. I want to say probably about a total of maybe a year to 2 years. So most of my teenage years.
Did, maybe we shouldn't ask this on a podcast. Were people sneaking drugs in for you or what?
No.
We don't have to give names or anything.
My parents never stuck drugs in for me, but I had convinced them to bring chew in. You know what I mean? I need some tobacco.
A little dip, huh?
Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure they're like, well, it's just tobacco. You know, I mean.
Yeah.
Let's, and sorry to interrupt your story there. I just want to get a little bit of this, man, because I want to understand this. So you're 15, 16 years old. So you start selling weed at like 13, 14.
Yes.
Then it progresses to coke.
Yes.
15, 16. And it's funny, I said like clubs. I mean, you weren't even old enough to get into clubs.
Yeah.
Did your parents have any idea you were selling this stuff?
No.
Did they have any idea you were doing drugs?
They had a great idea I was doing drugs. I was on probation, juvenile probation. And I would get tested and I would come up dirty, obviously.
Because you just didn't care.
Yeah. And there was a point where, my mom married another man, right? We lived at my grandmother's house. And in my grandmother's eyes, you know, God rest her soul, I never could do any wrong, you know, good or bad. Grandma's house is grandma's house. And we lived in her basement, because her husband had died and she needed somebody to take care of her other son, which had diabetes and had his leg amputated. So I was always around like the medical field.
Okay,
you know?
Right. You were comfortable with needles and help.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? Yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah. But I had learned to make a bladder at a really young age, and what a bladder is it basically is you get a bag, right? Get an IV bag. Let's say it's an IV bag, and you can fill it up with warm water, right? And you could put food coloring in it, whatever, what have you. Well, I learned at that age because I had all the supplies that I could make a bladder. Well, that only worked for so long.
For testing, right?
Yeah, for testing, yeah. Because my PO would test me all the time. Well, then they started the drop your pants thing where you have to actually drop your pants to your ankles and they watch you urinate. So I kind of got busted and I had to do a week into detention for that, you know.
Did you ever strap urine on your leg?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. But what I would do is I'd put the bag under my armpit, right? And I would use like an ace bandage and I'd wrap it around my body. And then
that's a good one. Why did I ever think of that?
Right? And then I would get one of those paper, it's like a paper clip basically. And I would clip the end of that bladder and I'd just have it perfectly cut to my knee. So when I would pull up, obviously it would look like there's nothing there. And I'd just pull that little paper clip out and it worked for quite some time. Well, I ended up getting, I guess you could say, raided. Basically, my mom had called the cops on me and was like, this kid is up to something. He's stealing my pills. And my mother, she is an addict herself and she, you know, abused her meds. Mm-hmm. And I used that to my advantage. So I started stealing her Xanax and stuff like that. and using them. And
were you selling them too?
yeah, I was selling those too. And the crazy thing is, so my mom has epilepsy, and as do I, and they would prescribe you Xanax. And even as a child, I was on an adult dosage for my seizures. And I learned what they did to me because they gave me that mask, that numbing sensation if I took more.
And then you would forget about all that prior childhood drugs.
It's just
because was that constantly haunting you?
Yeah, I would say it was because I had built a hate for him and what he had did to me. I had built an ultimate fire within that he was the scum of the earth.
Like you kind of built your identity around being angry at him and
exactly
kind of fixating. Yeah.
Exactly. And of course, being a kid and experiencing all of that stuff and then having to put on this shell and now coming out of it like, okay, so right now I'm 2.5 years sober, and coming out of it, I'm just like, holy crap, like what have I done to myself? I've ultimately, for a while there, I'd ultimately had a lot of regrets on the things that I had done and my experiences and stuff like that. But I couldn't let my past define me any longer. So now I live in the present, which has ultimately been helping me throughout my recovery.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Mark Miller Subaru. Remember, when you support our sponsors, you are directly supporting this podcast. In true Subaru fashion, Mark Miller Subaru isn't afraid to take the road less traveled. That's why Mark Miller Subaru is honored to be Utah's only negotiation-free Subaru retailer.
Mark Miller Subaru's exclusive negotiation-free program is called Promise Price. All vehicles sold at Mark Miller Subaru are competitively priced, so customers know that they are getting an exceptional deal.
Everyone, regardless of who you know, you're going to pay the same price. The price you see is the price you pay. Mark Miller Subaru is committed to revolutionizing the car buying experience. By offering people a transparent, competitive, and honest price up front, Mark Miller Subaru can focus on providing you with a fun and memorable experience instead of one of those gnarly, tainted negotiations.
Mark Miller Subaru has 2 convenient locations for you to visit. There's Mark Miller Subaru Midtown, which is at 3535 South State Street in Salt Lake City. This is the one that Chris and I personally use for our Subaru needs. And Mark Miller Subaru Southtown at 10920 State Street in Sandy.
Hey, go test drive a Subaru today. I already know that you're going to love it because I couldn't imagine living here in Utah without our Subaru Impreza. It's gotten us out of some sticky situations that I know a regular Joe car would not have been able to handle. So again, go visit them at their Midtown or Southtown locations. And of course, many thanks to Mark Miller Subaru for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by the Salt Lake Barber Company. Remember, when you support one of our sponsors, you are directly supporting this podcast. Hey, the Salt Lake Barber Company is located at 10 East 800 South, right on the corner of 8th and Main. They offer haircuts, beard trims, straight razor shaves. Full disclosure, Isaac over there, he's been cutting my hair. Gosh, it's been a while. It's been maybe a couple of years. He does a bang-up job. I love this guy. Hey, they are a true community barbershop. They focus on providing the best work environment possible and allowing barbers to always provide the highest quality experience while in the chair. They do take walk-ins if they're available, but why not just book a time really easy on their website, saltlakebarberco.com. It's really easy to do. You just go on there, you select the service you want, you select the barber, you put it on your calendar, and you go in and you get yourself a nice haircut. Again, haircuts, beard trim, straight razor shaves, the Salt Lake Barber Company, their website, saltlakebarberco.com. Many thanks to the Salt Lake Barber Company for sponsoring this episode. Let's get back into that conversation with Cody Egbert. Thanks for listening. So you got busted for drugs.
Yeah.
Because this is, I kind of want to paint, maybe not paint a picture, but I want listeners to understand that there's something, in my opinion, wrong with a lot of this pictures of just throwing drug addicts right in prison.
Mm-hmm. Like the way
instead of getting them help.
Yeah.
Right? Do you think something else should be done than arresting drug addicts?
Absolutely. So I'm no stranger to the justice system.
Oh,
like
sure.
I said. So This could go all the way back to when I was a kid too, because at 15 years old, my mom had my house raided, right? And I had gotten busted with dope, and I had went to detention. And in there, I fought people, I did whatever, and I kind of gained trust, right?
Wait, where were you fighting? At school or at juvie?
No, in juvie.
Okay.
And I had gained trust with the other guys around me, and drugs were there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just about who you know, and they were there. Going to the adult system, there was more drugs. As long as you had money, you had drugs. So I think, and I've never been to, the state penitentiary, but I have been into places that are just as bad, like Davis County Jail is a federal institution.
Really?
Yes, they have federal inmates there. And you can only imagine the drugs that are coming in and out of that place. There's overdoses that happen on a daily basis. You got people that are bringing in syringes that have been used from 5 to 10 different people. So now not only is there a drug issue, but there's a disease issue with hepatitis C. So it kind of expands more. In rehabilitation, I have found myself, and ultimately it's taken me a few times to actually get through this and actually be willing to take this rehabilitation seriously. Because of course there's going to be a lot of people that, oh, hey, I want to stay out of jail, right? They stay out of jail, they go to rehab, and then they mess up again. But if you're able to actually want this rehabilitation and take it seriously, it could change your life. Now, in my opinion, these aren't facts, these are just my opinions, but the justice system or the judicial system wanting to lock people up for drugs, and that goes selling drugs, using drugs, because if you sell, you use. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of the way of the game. People don't really realize that we use drugs because there's something wrong with us. Drugs is just a coping mechanism. Right? There's something wrong with me. That's why I use drugs, and that's why I'm a drug addict, right? I'm trying to
the level
pain.
of nonviolent drug-related incarcerations is through the roof.
Absolutely.
And it's people who really, for the most part, just need help.
Exactly. And it's crazy because just as of recently, they're starting to get people with a lower income, right, that are able to actually receive treatment. And that's the people that actually need that treatment. I mean, me working in treatment as I do now, I see that there's a lot of privileged people, right, that have a little bit of money in their pocket and they're able to go through treatment. And it's a lot quicker than how somebody would if they were coming from where I did, like Rose Park, and they're out here on the streets homeless. But there's a lot of cool things that are in the works. Like I actually am working for one of the companies or treatment centers. It's a recovery community based, and we take the low incomes and they think lower incomes but higher risk. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's how I was always viewed, as lower income, higher risk. I had been to 2 different treatment centers. One of the treatment centers that I had actually went to was like all big and glamorous and beautiful, but then I started to receive drugs from some of the staff there because they're human too. And yes, money talks, but they knew a way to make money. So they were providing drugs to us. Well, I was like, I could do this myself out on the street. So I had left. Well, somebody actually had overdosed and died there. And then the federal government actually raided them. And that was just a few years back before I had actually gotten sober.
Oh, wow.
We have some questions from our Facebook group. I want to get into it in just a moment here, Cody, but I want to find out, what was it that finally,
the tipping point?
Yeah, the tipping point, man, that you're like, because you said you're 2.5 years clean, which congratulations on that, man. I'm sure every day is still a battle for you.
Absolutely.
What's keeping you clean, and what made you want to get clean, man?
Okay, so it was okay, so maybe a little bit under 2.5 years, but it was March 21st of 2017.
I'll keep saying 2.5, man.
Yeah. So it was March 21st, 2017, and basically I had been on the run from adult probation and parole, and I was choosing to be homeless because I didn't want my family to get in any legal trouble. I was living from motel room to motel rooms, just selling, stealing, doing
all here in the Salt Lake area, right?
Yeah, this is from here all the way to 146th. downtown to 146 was where I was going, and I was hotel hopping basically. And some hotels out here don't really care what you do. But anyway, I had gotten kicked out of a hotel room for having too many people coming in and out. So I had nowhere to go. So I was out here on the block, and I was very familiar with people out there, and I got hooked up, and I was sick. And when I say sick, heroin is something that takes you to a place of physical, like, depth of hell. Like, I mean, methamphetamine takes you to and diminishes your health, but you get so physically dependent on heroin that you cannot function, and you will do damn near anything to achieve,
to get your next fix,
to get that, right? So ultimately I got hooked up, and I was supposed to sell these drugs for so-and-so, right? So I had drugs on me. I had called a friend of mine, and I was like, hey, can you come pick me up? Like, I need to get well is what we call it, and all that good stuff. Well, she had went into the gas station, and I had starting to like come out of my sickness. I started to be a little bit more aware, and noticed that there was cars that resembled adult probation and parole. And then I was paranoid, obviously. Well, she got into the vehicle, and little did we know that I was being watched, and the cops came up on me, and they had pulled me out of the car, and I had drugs on me. She had just brought her kids into the car. So now that I had gotten in trouble with a child endangerment charge because I had drugs on myself, but she had brought the kids into the car. So I'd gotten another charge on top of that. Anyway, I go to jail, and I look like hell. Okay. Like, we're talking, I weigh like 235 pounds right now. I probably went in there weighing 123 pounds.
Wow.
My skin was all picked out and everything, but I had looked in the mirror that had a bunch of scratches on it, right? And I looked in that mirror, and I just said, I don't want to be an addict anymore. How can I do this? And at that point, to me, in my mind, like, I had already been through treatment. It'd been ultimate fails, across the board.
And like, you felt like there was really no way.
Yeah, I felt that there was no way out, basically.
Yeah.
So I had waited until they did tray pass, right? And there's, like I said, there's drugs in there, and I had gotten some drugs.
Did you say tray pass? Tray
pass. So that's when they call, like, it's like 6:30 in the morning, and they bring trays, and they just slide them into this little door.
Okay.
So I didn't even eat it, I just left
like
it there.
food, right?
Yeah, and they have to come collect the trays. So they come collect the trays. Well, I get past some heroin, because obviously I know people in there. It's easy to obtain. And I am so mad at myself because this is what I wanted. I'm now putting a drug before even food, and that's how your survival instinct goes when you're a heroin addict. You'll put it before sex, food, water, shelter, anything. So I did what I had to do, but I didn't get high. I got mad at myself. So I waited for them to come collect the trays. I tied 2 sheets together. And if you look at a bunk bed in a jail cell, there's holes on the top of the bunks. And I had tied 2 knots, and I had the sheet sag, basically. Well, I started twisting the sheet, and I put it around my neck, and I did 3 somersaults and sat down on my hands and lifted up my feet. When I say sat down on my hands, I just linked them together, and they were under my butt, so I was just swinging there. And then I had woke up, and when I had woke up, I had nothing but nurses and cops all by me. They're doing a bunch of things to my sternum, and I didn't feel any pain at that point, and then I had went back out. Well, then I had woke up again, and there was a tube in my throat, and then they put me right back out. Then I yet woke up again, and the feeling of hope, I guess you could say, came running through me, like, I hope I make it through this. But ultimately, just maybe a few hours, maybe even a few days ago, I wanted to die.
Mm-hmm.
So something had sparked in me, like, I don't have to do this anymore.
Like you went past the edge and then you came back.
Yeah. And something, there was drive in me, and when that drive had hit me, I wanted more from myself. I wanted more for myself. And the only way to obtain it is to go get it at this point. So that's when I had that, it's called a spiritual awakening. If anybody's familiar with AA or CA or any of the A's out there, it talks about this spiritual awakening where you realize that you've reached the bottom and now it's time to come up. So that's the best way I can explain when I knew I had to do something different. Yeah. And I wasn't craving drugs. I wasn't craving alcohol. All I wanted was, I was present, and all I wanted was to get better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
well, congratulations again on 2.5 years. And
yeah,
I want to get more into that. There's some questions though that I think will open up some questions that I kind of wanted to ask you anyways from our Facebook group. And I wanted to make sure to at least acknowledge a few of these questions.
Absolutely.
Just because these are rad listeners of the show. And I think they're good questions. The first one's from Courtney. She says, as someone who has drug addicts in my family, what is something I can do to help with their recovery? Is it all a personal journey, or does outside help really make a difference? And we were kind of talking about recovery now.
Outside help, as far as enabling doesn't make a difference, right? But outside help, just loving them and letting them know on a day-to-day basis that you're there and that you love them. Now, most of the time, us as addicts, when we try to get our lives back on track, we don't necessarily have all the tools that we can to get our lives back on track. But having outside help, somebody helping you to go get bed sheets for a bed if you're going into like a sober living, or groceries, just something to that extent. I wouldn't say hand anybody $20, but I would say go out and do something nice and help them that they actually need, with something they actually need, and just loving them. The ultimate thing is loving them.
You know, I've known a handful of drug addicts through my time here on Earth. One thing I've discovered though, and maybe this is just my own perception, it seems like what made them get clean was their family turning their back to them, was their friends turning their back to them though. And basically they had nobody. And so I don't know. I mean, you're kind of saying that doesn't work for
well, I think I see kind of what you're both saying, because there's a huge problem with when you love people, accidentally enabling them.
Yes.
And giving them too much leeway and allowing yourself to not see what's actually happening.
Yeah, well, because they'll steal from their family. They'll take, the bicycle to the pawn shop, their mom's wedding ring to the pawn shop, just to buy their next fix.
Yes.
But sometimes loving them is setting those boundaries where you're like, you're not allowed to come in my house, but I love you.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
Like,
or even tough love. So I wouldn't say fortunately, but my parents have been through addiction and still are. But let's put myself in my shoes. Actually, my parents are out there living motel to motel, right? Still, yeah. And rather than me giving them money and getting them a place to stay or whatever, I'll just give them a call or whatever it takes, But now they're starting to get healthier, and now we help each other. So that's how it was in the beginning, was just like, hi mom, I'm okay. I'm still sober. Are you guys doing good? How's dad? Yada, yada, yada. But now we actually help each other because they're getting a little bit more stable. I've also had people just write me off completely. People that I actually considered family, because I had lied and I'd stole from them. And now that I've been sober, I've been actually able to make an amends with them. Like, these are the things that I did. What can I do to pay it back? And all they want me to do is succeed. But just loving them, but not enabling them. And yeah, of course, people who don't understand the disease are going to some may understand it, but some also may just wash their hands because they don't understand the disease itself.
Another question here from a listener of the show that was asked in our Facebook group, which I invite everybody, just search I Am Salt Lake Community on Facebook, and that will send you to our Facebook group. But Jenny wants to know, I would love to hear his take on the homeless situation. Does he have suggestions for programs that can have a positive impact? And I know this is a little bit out of your realm, but you were homeless for a while.
Yes.
And would you say, well, let's even talk a little bit on homeless. I mean, would you say most of the homeless here in Salt Lake City have drug addictions, drug problems?
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Do you have any suggestions for programs?
Yes. So there's a few programs out there. The VOA, they actually out here in just downtown, they actually help a lot of people like that. But most, and it's unfortunate, but most people, they say they want the help, but they just want a reset. And what a reset is basically, okay, I haven't eaten for a good 30 days. I haven't had a place to sleep for a good 30 days. And then they get to that point of, well, okay, well, now I've slept and I feel good. Okay, I'm ready for another run. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually part of a thing that I created. It's called Never Give Up. I've been a part of some other groups in the past, but this is something I have created myself. And in doing that, I've actually went out and I've offered to help, some of the homeless out there. And a lot of them, and this is just from their perspective, are comfortable of living the way that they are.
On the streets, yeah.
On the streets, because somebody had actually told me, I don't have a job. I don't need a job. All I can do is just walk up the street and go to the church and get some food. And then that goes back to that enabling part, right? But if you turn your back on these people, they're going to lose their lives.
Right.
Like I said, there is some good programs, but it's all about the person individually wanting the help to do it. And then after the VOA actually helps and points you in the right direction for treatment, such as, one that's just came up that I'm actually a part of is Warrior Spirit, where they take that low income insurance, that TAM, that Medicaid, and help people get better.
Have you heard of the Other Side Academy?
Other Side Academy is a great program. I actually was going to go there one time, and I went there loaded, and they didn't like that too much. But now being a part of these groups, I've actually referred people to the Other Side Academy. Dave over there, the guy who's pretty much runs the place, they've created something beautiful, because it's ultimately things with addiction just isn't about the addiction. It's obviously the behavior, right? And they focus on a lot of the behavior there. And correcting the behavior. And I think the Other Side Academy is just
they're the ones that moved us, right?
Yeah,
From Taylorsville to downtown.
I've kind of made a conscious effort whenever we need to move or do anything. I want to hire the Other Side movers. They do an amazing job.
Yeah,
And
those are some guys and girls who've had nothing, and they've been able to correct their behavior. And I'm pretty sure if you had some experience with them, they're polite.
Oh, they're so polite. They're so helpful.
I offered them a beer, and they didn't even.
Friendly.
I'm kidding. They didn't even want my beer. No, man. So if anybody's, and they're not even sponsors,
and they
of this
have a
podcast,
thrift shop. You can donate things.
Go support them if you're moving.
Yeah.
Probably just within Salt Lake here. They probably don't help people move out of state.
I'm not.
You can call them. They're super helpful.
And the cool thing is they obviously, when people are moving, people get a lot of different things where they don't even want some of their stuff. Well, the Other Side Academy actually has like a thrift store.
Yeah. Do you know where's that at?
I believe it's just here on State.
Here.
It's just I think it's around 45th. Don't quote me on that.
No, you're right. I know exactly where it is. If you're heading on State Street south, I think it's like right on the same, or on the west side of the street before you hit the DI there on the 45.
Yeah.
I got to talk to you about marijuana and legalization.
Okay.
Man. What are your thoughts? And if you don't want to talk about this, it's fine.
Okay.
But a listener wanted to know your thoughts. I want to know your thoughts. I want to know your thoughts even on marijuana being a gateway drug. Okay. Do you feel it's a gateway drug? I
feel that marijuana is not a gateway drug. I also feel that it can be used as a drug, depending on the person and their behaviors, right, and what they're using it for.
And food can be used as a drug too.
Exactly, food can be used as a drug. I mean, working out can be used as a drug, and these are things that are healthy for you.
They're all coping mecanisms.
So personally, in my experience, in my own experience, I've never used marijuana as a drug. I've used it as an abusive drug. Let's put it that way. I have used it to self-medicate myself because medications are drugs. So we're going to go back and forth, but I've used it for my seizures in the past, which I had went a long streak without having seizures. I had also used it for bipolar disorder, mood stabilization. And obviously we know the more terminal things that it could be used for, as well as pain. If you guys would have known me a few years ago, I had really bad teeth, and I would use marijuana to actually cope with that pain.
Because your teeth were in constant pain?
Because my teeth were in constant pain, and I was in the middle of fighting court cases, so I was off the heroin. Mm-hmm. But I always went back to trying to figure something to try to correct it and fix it. Obviously, me being an opioid addict, I've realized that there's alternatives, right? I could take a Tylenol and an ibuprofen and it helps the pain just as good as an Oxycontin does, you know? That's if you're looking for that, just the pain to go away. But if you're looking for that other little
the emotional
extra,
thing,
and to feel that, then obviously that's something that's not good for you. But the legalization of marijuana, I feel, is something that could change not only this state, right, but this entire nation. and it could build. Obviously, we're going to have some people out there that are abusing it and using it for recreational purposes. And that's their business, not my business, you know? But what my business is if I could use it to help with my back pain, if I could use it so I can get off, 3 different pills. Currently, I don't use marijuana, okay? Cause I'm on adult probation and parole.
Cause you're still on probation.
Cause I'm still on probation. And the unfortunate thing is I'm on this thing, I was on this stuff called lithium, which ultimately, as I was at work, I had an episode with, cause it was building up in my system and the levels got toxic, right? And then, there's like the gabapentin and that's not even a narcotic, but it also can be abused and kill you. So I think that there's a lot of different things that and benefits from cannabis that could change a lot of people's lives as well as help people with terminal illness, And I also, I don't know if this would actually be something that would be true, but I also think the crime and the jails wouldn't be so full because then they can make room for the serious charges and people rather than locking somebody up for having some pot.
So you don't think, okay, let's hypothetically say Utah legalized weed, marijuana.
Okay.
Right. Just recreational reasons. Yeah. Do you think that would just turn everybody into drug addicts and start smoking meth and shooting up heroin?
Well, is everybody an alcoholic because alcohol's legal?
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
and that's what cause I know so many people now. I understand people that did have a meth problem or had a heroin problem. I understand maybe you have to stay away from it, right? Yeah. I've known people that they can't even smoke a joint once in a while, right?
Yeah.
I get that. But at the same time, it's safer than alcohol.
Yeah.
And yet it's illegal.
Yeah.
And I just think something's wrong. Something's wrong with our whole system, man. To just throw these drug addicts right in jail.
I think people fear something that they just don't understand.
Because nobody knows. Nobody knows.
Here's just a little bit of my experience. When I was smoking weed, I was selling weed. Why? Because it was illegal and I could make money off of it.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Boom. There's a crime right there, right? But when I was using weed, I wasn't using coke because they're the exact opposite high. When I was using weed, I wasn't using meth, because obviously that's not the high that I wanted, so I wanted to use meth. When I was using heroin, never would mix the two ever because of it makes you really down, like you can't function. So I wouldn't even use marijuana when I was using these other drugs that I had became so physically, mentally, and I guess you could say dependent on,
Mm-hmm.
I always tried to just stay away from weed when I was using that. And there would be a time where I would be selling weed and I'd be smoking meth, because the people wanted weed.
Mm-hmm.
So then I'd just be smoking meth and selling weed, but I wouldn't never mix the two.
Did you ever sell harder drugs like meth? Well, you said coke. I guess you sold coke.
I sold coke. As my story goes on, I started to sell every drug that I used, right? I would sell the Xanax and I would sell the meth and I would sell heroin. Doing that, like now that I'm sober, I probably had people that I had sold to that had overdosed and died. And that's something that I may have to live with. I don't know, but it's unfortunate but it's just facts. If you're out there selling stuff and you're not knowing what's in this stuff and you're killing people, you might want to check yourself at the door because you don't know what you're getting yourself into.
Well, and that's the thing with, I know that we do discuss the legalization of drugs fairly often, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I mean, I don't see why it's not a good idea, because there would probably still be somewhat of a black market because it would add taxes and regulation, whatever, but it would at least be a safer alternative for people, You at least know what you're getting, or, it's a more controlled environment, right?
My thing, I think people would ask for help a little easier. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that get addicted to drugs, but a lot of times they don't know who to turn to, who to tell. Exactly. A lot of times their own spouse doesn't even know.
Well, if you try to go get help, you can just get arrested. Exactly. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous.
What's actually been an eye-opener for me in the past is me selling heroin, right? And heroin is just an alternative to Oxycontin, Percocet, Percodan, all those opioids that doctors were just handing out. Oh, Oxycontin, non-addictive, right? You know what I mean? It just boggles my mind ultimately. But then you get the people that have got that taken away from them because now all of a sudden, we're starting to be calling big pharma on their shit. You know what I mean? And now when we do that, they're starting to like take it away and manage it. Well, then you get people, like even from the LDS community, okay, that was suffering through pain, became physically dependent on an opioid, right? And now they're seeking other ways to get it, right? Which is illegal, right? And then which comes to the heroin, right? There has been people in my past that I have actually, I guess you can say, illegally sold to, but in my mind, I justified it as, oh, I'm just helping this person out. And in their mind, they're just like, I'm just trying to get normal. Like, I don't do this. This is like freaking me out.
Like, I'm not a drug addict.
I'm not
a
drug addict.
Better.
I just need to get normal so I can make it through my day tomorrow.
So when you were selling them heroin, you knew that they were part of the religious community.
Absolutely.
Right here in Salt Lake City, man.
And the way that I got introduced to these people was just on a fluke, you know? Somebody pulled up beside me and I'm walking, you know, it's late at night. I'm walking. They're just getting off work. They asked me if I needed a ride. You get to talking, right? Hey, by chance, can you get any pills? You know, it's just like, it strikes conversation. I mean, there's been time, and Uber and Lyft are great, right? But let me just tell you what, me using those as ways to get to where I needed to go, then you start finding out things about the Uber driver, right? And then ultimately you're paying the Uber driver in drugs to take you to where you need to go. So it's off the books, you know, they don't need to be, you know, they're my driver. They're no longer Uber's drivers. They're off the clock on Uber and they're on the clock on Cody. You know what I mean?
And that's inevitably human nature, you know, no matter what, it doesn't say anything about Uber or Lyft, right? Specifically, it's just, we as humans tend to find it easy to rationalize the situations that we find ourselves in.
Absolutely. Or, and then you got that person that's trying to make money for their family, right? I've known drug dealers that don't even use. They won't even touch this stuff.
Breaking Bad.
Exactly.
Did you ever watch Breaking Bad? Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen Breaking Bad.
Is that pretty off spot on?
It's right on the money. I can tell you that much. Yes, it's spot on. And the thing is people are going to try to, I mean, the jobs out here, right? We need more jobs. And if let's say they do legalize cannabis, that's going to bring, you know, more financial revenue for the state. And not only that, but the nation, right? And it's going to provide some more jobs out there and more job opportunities.
And we need to legalize the growing here immediately, because if we just legalize it and we don't have the capability to produce it,
we'll ask Oregon. They got too much.
Can
we get a loan?
There you go.
I want to touch on, before we completely run out of time here, and I know I'm going to have to just bring you back through here, Cody.
Okay.
What are, especially, okay, we're parents, right?
Yeah.
Chrissy and I, we have 4 kids, right? Let's use that as an example. What are warning signs for kids to know, hey, my kids are on drugs? Like if a parents,
what are the things that you should look for to see if your kid's actually starting to cross over into a dangerous situation?
Okay. I would, first, I would love your child, like, and get as much information from them as possible, right? Like but you can't be with them 24/7. But what you can see is their sleeping pattern, right? If they are sleeping too much or too little, or
that's hard though, because kids. I mean, I slept a lot as a boy. You know, growing.
I sleep a lot now.
So like I'm saying like maybe like 16 years old, right? And they're just sleeping all
for
day.
Days.
Yeah.
That would be a warning sign that they're on something like a downer or something, right? Obviously with alcohol, you know, slurred speech, the way they smell, obviously. But if you're their parent, you're going to notice those things pretty spot on. But it's the silent things that's a killer. So you may think that your child is just going to the bathroom, right? But they could be looking in your medicine cabinet. Or they could be trying to cook up some heroin, right? And they're just in there a long time.
In the bathroom?
Yeah, and the shower's just on and you're thinking that they're in the shower. Watch the behavior after that. If you're thinking that they've been in there a little too long, just watch the behavior after that. Because it could be something like that, like something right before bed. Then this is what I would do too, because this is how I thought. I would go use right before bed, right? And it would just look like something normal. Oh, he's showering before bed. He's been in there a long time, but he's probably okay.
Probably just, a teenage boy.
Exactly.
Yeah, you do not want to call your teenage
Exactly.
boy on spending too much time in the shower because that just gets uncomfortable.
So that's something that what I would do is because us as humans, we want to manipulate the situation. And if we're trying to get away with something, we're going to do the best that we can. But they're friends. Friends is a huge thing. If you know they're friends, you're going to know your child because people are who they surround themselves with. Yeah. And that's probably the biggest thing that I would say is friends.
If you find out that your kid is doing drugs, or if you have a good suspicion, really good, would you confront him?
Absolutely. Okay. I would make them aware. Obviously, in the community that we live in, my son's on pot, my son's on pot and he's gonna burn
he wants
down
to make
the world.
spaghetti in the morning.
Exactly. I would tell him or her, look, I've experienced with this. This is my experience with this. I would ask you not to bring it in my house, and I would also ask that you don't even use it. But ultimately, we cannot control everything. They're probably still going to use it. Now, methamphetamine or heroin, I would try to seek some juvenile help immediately, because if you don't, it only takes less than 30 days for them to be full-blown, like, physically addicted to those things.
Straight up addicted to it.
Yeah, like full-blown, like, I need this. This helps me in school. This helps me with that. So going back real quick to that survival instinct, right? So things that humans say that they need to survive is food, right? Sex, water, and shelter, right? There may be another one in there. What heroin did to me is it put heroin, right? Because in my midbrain, it was there's these receptors, right? And it's like constantly hitting those receptors, and as it's hitting those receptors, I'm getting that like, okay, so if I go in the mountains, right, and a bear attacks me, am I going to have that willpower to go out and try to survive? That's what the same receptors that you're hitting constantly with opiates, right? So being an opiate addict, I go out into the woods and I get attacked by a bear, I'm giving up. There's no hope for me. But when I start to replace food, sex, shelter, all of that stuff, and I just put heroin first, that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to steal from my family. I'm going to steal from my girlfriend. I'm going to lie. I'm going to steal your car so I could go get it. I'm going to ask you for money. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And it just takes over your entire life. So if you are experiencing any type of opioid addiction with your children or even meth, please seek help immediately, because it only takes less than 30 days for them to have that replaced to
be completely dependent on it for functionality.
To be completely dependent.
It's probably a lot more popular amongst the youth here in Salt Lake City than we even probably realize.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I was hanging out with people that were 5, maybe 6 years younger than me. And the thing is the people that I hung out with were 5 and 6 years older than me, right? So let's say I'm 20 years old. Well, you got 16-year-olds that are buying meth. 16-year-olds buying meth. And that's how it was with the generation before me. I was buying from them. It starts very young.
It can
start very, very, very young.
You do a Facebook group, Never Give Up. You were talking about that. So is that also like a group outside of Facebook?
Yeah. So I'm actually just starting to get it up and running again. I had created it a couple years ago, and then I had joined some other groups and got really involved with them. But then now I've stepped out of those other groups, and I wanted to create something of my own, which is Never Give Up. And this just doesn't go with just addiction. This is through anything, any type of physical abuse that you're trying to make it through as an adult or whatever, even as a child, or you need a heart transplant. I've actually did an interview with a young man that needs a heart transplant. Just something that in your life or an obstacle or anything that you are going through and you want to voice it and you want to get it out there and you want to reach out for help. I have 600 members right now. It's not too much.
That's good though for a Facebook group.
Yeah. And just wanting to vent or maybe seek help in another direction or getting some feedback. Never Give Up is just something that's there that's not mine. It's everyone's. And with the opposite of addiction is connection. The opposite of, depression is connection. All these things can correlate, and and not only myself, but that group can actually help you.
It's a really great support group.
Are you in the group, Kristen?
Yeah. I joined the group when you told me about it, Cody.
Yeah.
And just seeing the people in there are just so willing to be there for each other. And like, no matter what you're facing, what you're dealing with, there's a community for you. So I would say anyone who's listening who just needs a community or support in any way, go join that group, because no matter what you're dealing with, the people there want to hear you out and they want to be there for you. Yeah,
absolutely. And I suffer from depression, anxiety, all that stuff, right? And sometimes I just need to let it out and like, this is what I'm going through. What do I do? Or this doctor changed my meds and I don't know what to do. And then you got 10 different people telling you, okay, well, try this, try this, try this. They're giving you feedback, right? And ultimately they're giving you some validation too. Like, look, I'm here for you. I'm listening to you.
Yeah, just being heard is so important.
So just do a search, Never Give Up, probably right in Facebook.
Yeah, Never Give Up on Facebook.
I'll put a link for that as well at iamsaltlake.com for people listening. If for some reason you forget what the name was or something, just go to iamsaltlake.com with this episode. Any other tips? Well, you probably have a lot of tips for people that want to be.
Don't do drugs, folks.
Well, no, that want to get well, right?
Yeah.
Like how when you hit that moment when you knew you needed help, I'm sure there's people listening right now that there might be one or two that they're like, I know I need help.
Yeah.
Besides joining Never Give Up, what else? Do you have something else you would tell them or?
Absolutely. Contact your physician. And to be honest with you, your physician probably already knows that you're abusing drugs. If you see a physician,
are they just going to throw them right in jail though?
No, absolutely not.
There's a lot of client privilege, right?
Yeah, HIPAA.
With that.
HIPAA.
Yeah, HIPAA privacy
But
policies.
if you're saying, look, I'm recreationally using methamphetamine or opiates. See, there's a lot of medications for this thing that can actually help you get off of heroin or get off of meth, But if you seek out to your physician and say, look, I need some help, they have a lot of resources themselves, but also contacting local treatment centers. Renaissance Ranch is a huge one.
Here in Utah?
Yeah. Renaissance Ranch is a huge one. That one has actually helped me get where I'm at, as well as Reflections Treatment Center. So I did intensive inpatient treatment where I was residential at a place called Reflections Treatment Center. And then I did outpatient at Renaissance Ranch Treatment Center. And being spiritually fit, and what spiritually fit means is basically you've come to the realization that you have had a spiritual awakening and you need more help. Them opening my eyes to more behaviors that I had and that I've carried my entire life, and just kind of dissecting that and putting it on the table and like, look, this is what you're dealing with. How can we help you? Coming from that stance, it changed my life. Steps Treatment Center. There's a lot of treatment centers out there that you can make a call and they'll do their damnedest to get you in. But if you, and also if you guys would like, if you do reach out on Never Give Up, those are the names of the treatment centers, just some that I could provide or other people can provide, and that what they've been through.
And I'm sure they could even come to the group to ask for advice or suggestions, because I'm sure there's different scenarios and situations for each person.
Yeah. And on the group, there's a lot of different topics and whatever. And my admins, we only moderate things that need to be moderated. I have like 5 rules on there. And one is like, be courteous, right? Some things like, no glorifying drug use or violence, just some simple rules that people can follow. But I'm not going to try to erase people's things because I'm like, oh, this person, they're asking how they can get help off and getting off of heroin, and they're sticking a needle arm in their arm every day. I'm not going to erase something like that because one, there's a lot of groups that do, but for me, that's just real life stuff. Mm-hmm. So if you're ignoring it, then the problem's just going to be getting worse under the radar. Exactly. Yeah. And all it takes is a post on Never Give Up and saying, hey, I need help. Where can I find it? And I know I'll respond, but I'm sure there's probably like 600 other people that are going to give you some resources as well.
I have a question as we kind of wind this episode up a little bit here. I was curious how difficult it was for you to stay in Salt Lake City during your recovery. Because, you've lived here your whole life.
Yes.
You did all your drugs here. All your former drug addict friends are here. All your
whole
former
social
drug
circle.
dealers were here.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it have been easier to move out of state?
It would have
Or
been,
is it still hard for you?
it would have been easier to move out of state. Rather than doing that, I went to Utah County for some time, made a lot of good connections down there as far as like my boss actually lives out there, and that's how I got intertwined, but I couldn't leave. I wasn't going to run away ultimately from this problem, at least in my recovery, right? A lot of people can benefit from a geographical change, and getting out and starting over. But for me, there's just too much for me to stay. I just needed to stay. And doing that, I'm actually able, just like with Never Give Up, I'm actually helping those who I was poisoning with the drugs. And they're helping me as well. And what I mean by that is me helping one person one day at a time for the rest of my life. That if that keeps me sober, then I know I'm doing my job right. So it was hard in the beginning. It was hard to come back to these streets and man, I used to use there, but that's the reality of it. But you can go anywhere in this world and find it. If you're an addict, you already hold the keys.
Yeah, but like I know how it is for me, like I've had a few monumental relationships in my life. Like I remember after my first breakup with a girl, I was living out in Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah.
It was my first like real girlfriend. I had to get out of there, man, because I couldn't be constantly reminded of her or places, dates we went on or this or that. And so I was wondering if you know what I mean? Like you're like, oh man, I can't go to this park because that's where I got, the sweet heroin.
Yeah, absolutely. People, places, and things is huge. That's what addiction's about, right? There is even certain gas stations
that you just can't go to.
I won't go to. One is because somebody will probably recognize me, and then it's just going to be a situation where I'm like, hey, I'm doing so good, and it'll just So I try to avoid some places, and there's also where I try to avoid some people. But then again, if you go to a different state, right, and you're creating bonds with other people, but then you fall into hanging out with the wrong people, you're gonna have to go and flee there and flee there.
It's almost like staying here. You know what to avoid.
Yeah, I kind of know what to expect for the most part. If I go hang out on 1300 South or North Temple, I know I'm probably gonna get myself in some trouble.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. But if I know that I can stay spiritually fit and go, because I put myself in sticky situations all the time, and I would say never to do so unless you know what you're out there and your main goal is. And mine was to help people, take my dog out and have a group of people from Never Give Up or another group, or just some people who are wanting to help people, and go out and talk to people and see what you could do to help them. Maybe give them a ride to the VOA, stuff like that. So if I'm going out there and I'm committed to doing something, and I got my mind set on the prize, okay, I'm out here. Yes, it's scary, but what am I here for? And then you got like 10 other people that have your back, and they're doing the exact same thing. And that's when I actually go out and try to help someone. But there's going to be days where I'm going to have to walk to the Red Iguana or something, and that's what I keep my mind on is, okay, I'm going to the Red Iguana.
To get some tasty food.
I'm going to go get some tasty food. I might cross some people along the way, but I'm in a place where I could do that. And in early recovery, I would not suggest doing that. It's taken a long time to get where I'm at, and I still got a long way to go. Because it's an everyday battle.
Well, you're probably every day for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
Man. I mean,
still got a long,
I couldn't imagine.
I still hope it's a long way. I don't know if I might choke on like a peanut or something, but at least I know I'm doing something right. So,
well, dude, I know this isn't a good comparison, but I used to be a heavy cigarette smoker, and I still struggle with cigarettes. That is
a great comparison, actually.
Well, I've heard quitting smoking is almost harder than quitting heroin.
Yeah, it was just as bad. I was an asshole both ways.
Yeah, and so I still struggle to this day of wanting a cigarette from time to time. You know?
Mm-hmm. Is there something that we can do, like the typical person walking around not knowing what's going on? Is there something that we can do to help be involved, or even if it's small,
like just say something to get active.
Yeah, to get active, or to help anybody who might need help. Yeah,
I would say calling the VOA, asking them if there's any toiletry supplies that you could provide or maybe donate. I would also suggest like even the shelter's a good one to donate things if that's what you're trying to do. If you're trying to get down and work with people, Never Give Up would be a good one because we all can create events and things like that. And also you can get onto Facebook as well and look up a lot of different other recovery groups that hold events there where there's donating and there's giving back to the community and maybe helping families of those who've lost loved ones to the disease of addiction. There's a lot of different ways that you could reach out and be a part of it, whether you're an addict or not, so.
Is there a question that you were hoping we would ask or something that you were just like, I'm dying to talk about this? I know there's so much more, Cody, that we could talk about. We'll just have to bring you back through, like I said.
Absolutely.
But I didn't know if there was something that you wanted to talk about while we're still recording.
I think actually we hit everything right on the head.
Yeah.
Just the awareness that you can bring to loving an addict is huge. And knowing that it's not just an addict's disease, it's a family disease. So when there's one addict, it becomes a family issue. And what I mean by that is it affects the family as a whole, and it turns their lives upside down. That's pretty much it.
I always like to have a way for listeners to get a hold of the people that we chat with. Is there a way, like an email address even, or just through the group Never Give Up?
You can find me on Facebook at Never Give Up, and also you can find my personal Facebook, Cody Egbert at Facebook.com.
Very cool. I'm going to wrap this up. I mean, Chrissy has a final question that she likes to throw out at people. I'm going to let her wrap this episode up that way. Should we ask the Utah questions? I feel like it's not a proper podcast.
I feel like we should ask the Utah questions.
We ask a few Utah related questions. You up for this, Cody?
Yeah, I'm ready.
So we have friends and family, right? We all have friends and family that visit Utah, visit Salt Lake City from time to time. It's their first time coming, and they're like, show us around. Where's somewhere you would take them? I mean, we've had people say, Park City. We've had people tell us Utah Lake, the temple. I don't know. Do you have like one or two favorite things you like to do?
I've only actually been there once, but
been where? Oh,
been to where I'm going to say, which was Moab.
Oh yeah. You got to go to Moab.
I would have to say that is still like a memory that I have and that I would like to go back. So Moab definitely for the view and the activities that you could do out there.
I also like to ask people one or two favorite local eating spots. Is there somewhere where, even like to grab lunch in this area?
Cheddar Burger.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That is by far one of the best tasting burger places out here that I've had. And also, let's see.
And if that's all you can think of.
That's all I can think of.
Yeah.
At least out here in Salt Lake. I can go other places, but out here in Salt Lake for sure.
Throw your final question, Chrissy.
Yeah, my final question is, if you could leave a piece of advice or a motto that you live by with our listeners, what would it be?
Never give up.
Many thanks again to Cody Egbert for joining us on this episode of the podcast. All the links mentioned on this episode can be found on our website at iamsaltlake.com/393. That's for episode 393.
All right, guys, I need you to pay attention for just a moment. Are you driving a car? Pull over to the side. I need you to pay attention here because this is really important for us. City Weekly's Best of Utah voting is going on right now. It actually just started this last week. It's going to be going all the way until September 2nd. They have all kinds of categories here, guys. Best burgers, best restaurant, whatever. You get a vote for what you think is the best in Utah. Well, they have a best local podcast. So, of course, we need you to go vote for I Am Salt Lake podcast. You guys came through for us last year, so we're kind of hoping you'll come through again this year for us. We made a really easy URL that you could type into your web browser, just iamsaltlake.com/bestofutah2019, and that will forward you to their little voting section on the website or whatever. You just need to vote for 10 categories. So, keep in mind, maybe vote for some of our sponsors, Salt Lake Barber Company for Best Barber, CBD, Kennedy Botanicals. You guys get the idea, right? And of course, Best Vape Shop. You got to vote
Best Vape
Empire,
Shop, indeed.
Right?
Absolutely.
So make sure to get out there and vote for us. You have until September 2nd. Tell your family and friends to vote for us as well. And let's win this.
Let's win again.
Best local
Thank
podcast.
you guys. Just thank you, the best. You're the best listeners. Can we vote for everyone for the best listeners? I'm going to do that.
Why not?
Perfect. Support for I Am Salt Lake comes from KRCL 90.9. amplifying community voices since 1979. This listener-supported music discovery station covers everything from reggae and punk rock to local grassroots activism. Listen today at 90.9 FM or online at krcl.org.
Hey, before we get into our weekly recommendations, and we have some great recommendations this week, we need to give a shout out and some love to our Patreon supporters. Wow, we got all kinds of things to share with you guys this week, guys. I got to run down this list. We have a great group of Patreon supporters. I love these guys. You have no idea what you guys do for the podcast. Seriously, even $1 a month goes so far. If you want to become a Patreon supporter, it's really easy. Patreon.com/IamSaltLake. You can become a supporter for as little as $1. And you could be as cool as these guys: John Miller, Mark Copeland, Todd Bjorkland, Tim Horan, Nicole Davison, Alex Santee, Riley Padilla, Brandon Hill from Mountain Standard Time Marketing, Will Dugdale, Brittany Hemingway, Jeff Hadfield, Michael Beck, Eric Tomorrow, Jeff Hatt, Sana, Alan Martindale, Nick Naylor, Brett Schmidt, 3 Irons SLC, Nikki Line, Michelle Stevens-Williams, Margaret from Dirt in Your Skirt podcast, Christopher A. Heiser, and Jay Chambers. That is a list, you guys. I love them. They're the best.
Group of great people.
Yeah, I just want a group hug time. Group hug time. Again, become a Patreon supporter. Patreon.com/IamSaltLake. I believe there's also a link at IamSaltLake with this episode as well. And it is weekly recommendation time. This is that time of the podcast where Chrissy and I, we just give our own weekly recommendation. They're not sponsors. They don't even know we're talking about them, but it's just something we want to make sure to tell our listeners because we either love it or we discovered it or something. So what is your weekly recommendation, Chrissy?
I may have recommended this before, but I'm going to recommend it again because it is thebomb.com.
And we were there last night.
We were there last night. Quarters Arcade Bar, you guys. It is so much fun.
Go visit it. Seriously.
It's like reverting to childhood and just having an awesome night every time you go. So
go check it out. And what's their address? I think they're on the corner, like 400 South and Main Street or something like that. Old Club Manhattan. Hey, my weekly recommendation, and I'll probably get crap from the diehard gym fanatics, is Planet Fitness. Okay, I do have a bone to pick with them though, but I'm going to mention. So we recently moved again, thanks to Market Source Real Estate for helping us find our dream home. Mm-hmm. Great home, love it. Oh my gosh, seriously. But anyway, the gym that I was going to, 24 Hour Fitness, was further away, right? There's not a whole lot of them here in the area. So I was like, well, I'll try to find a new gym. Well, there's a Planet Fitness not far from the home at all. So I was like, well, let's go check this out. $10 a month.
Yeah.
You really cannot beat that. I can get everything done that I need to, my cardio and weightlifting and all that. So definitely, if you're on a budget and you want to go to a gym, check out Planet Fitness. The only bone I have to pick from, I don't understand why they push all the candy. There's a lot of candy.
Yeah,
They're Tootsie Rolls, and then I've heard they have pizza parties.
Pizza parties.
Yeah, that's kind of dumb. And geez.
See, I think it's because their whole thing is it's like a no shame gym, And so,
well, yeah, but why shove pizza in our face?
Well, that's probably true.
That's like somebody saying they're vegan, but here's a hamburger. That just doesn't make sense to me, right? Like you have values, and I get that. You can fine, eat candy but just don't pump it on a gym.
Well, yeah, that's fair. That's
just kind of silly. So,
well, that's going to do it for this episode. Don't forget to support our show sponsors, Mark Miller Subaru, Market Source Real Estate, and the Salt Lake Barber Company. We'll have links for all of them at our website under the notes for this episode, which you can always find at IamSaltLake.com. And if you have anything you'd like to share with us, you can always send us letters, postcards, or packages to P.O. Box 4412, Salt Lake City, Utah, 84110.
You have a great week. Make sure to get out and enjoy the city this week. Support local whenever possible, and we'll see you on the next episode.
And good night, Grammy.